You think God is somewhere far away. You think heaven is a place you go to when you die. You think you have to beg, earn, and prove yourself before you are worthy of anything good. But you are wrong. You are wrong about all of it. The truth is this: heaven was never a destination. It was always a posture. It was always a way of walking, a way of speaking, a way of carrying yourself through a world that forgot who it belonged to. There is a silent, invisible force that moves through the person who understands this. Most people never feel it because they spend their entire lives waiting for permission that was already granted. I call this force the sovereign presence. It is not something you build, it is something you remember. It is the awareness that the same breath that formed the stars is moving through your lungs right now, in this exact moment, as you listen to my voice. You do not attract the life you want. You radiate the life you already carry. You do not chase your destiny. You become the kind of person destiny cannot ignore. And here is what should frighten you. The person who forgets the sovereign presence spends decades apologizing for a light they were sent here to shine. They shrink. They wait. They ask permission from people who are just as lost as they are. They let small fears bury a calling the size of a mountain. And they die wondering why heaven never showed up, never realizing heaven was standing inside them the entire time, waiting to be acted from instead of prayed toward. So let me ask you something, and do not answer too quickly. If God is truly within you, if heaven really did send you, then why are you still living like an orphan begging at the gate of a house you already own? Hold that question. Do not rush to close it, because everything I am about to share with you exists to answer it. And by the time we reach the end of this journey, you will not just understand the answer, you will feel it moving in your bones. Let us begin where all real transformation begins, in the quiet recognition of who you actually are. There is a line in Genesis so familiar that most people read right past its power. God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." Sit with that for a moment. Not in the image of angels, not in the image of servants, in the image of the Creator himself. You were not manufactured, you were authored. You were not thrown into existence by accident, you were breathed into being by intention. And when something is made in the image of the divine, it carries a fragment of the divine nature inside it. This is not arrogance. This is inheritance. The tragedy of most lives is that people accept the inheritance of their fears, the inheritance of their family wounds, the inheritance of their culture's limitations, but they refuse the one inheritance that could set them free, the inheritance of their origin. Napoleon Hill said that whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. But notice the order of those words. Conceive first, believe second, achieve last. The achievement is never the beginning. The achievement is the echo of a conviction that was formed long before the world could see it. And what is a conviction really, but a decision about your own identity? When you decide that you are heaven sent, when you decide that God is within you and not merely watching you from a distance, your entire way of moving through the world changes. You stop flinching. You stop shrinking. You stop rehearsing your unworthiness like a script someone else wrote for you. If you feel that recognition stirring in you right now, even faintly, type the word remember in the comments. Just that one word. Because that is what this is. Not learning something new. Remembering something ancient. Let me tell you about a man who forgot who he was and then remembered. His name was Moses. Before he was the deliverer, before he parted the sea, before his face glowed from standing in the presence of God, he was a fugitive tending sheep on the backside of a desert. 40 years he spent in that wilderness, and if you had asked him who he was, he would have told you he was a failure, a murderer on the run, a prince who lost his palace, a man whose greatest days were behind him. He had buried his calling under decades of shame. And then one ordinary afternoon, a bush caught fire and would not burn away, and a voice called his name. And do you know what Moses said when God told him to go and free a nation? He said, "Who am I that I should go? Who am I?" That is the question that keeps kingdoms locked. That is the question that keeps you small. And God did not answer it the way Moses expected. God did not list Moses' qualifications. God did not remind him of his education in Pharaoh's house. God simply said, "I will be with you." Because the answer to "Who am I?" was never about Moses. It was about the presence that would go with him. This is the sovereign presence I told you about. It does not wait for you to become impressive. It moves the moment you stop hiding behind the word "who." Moses had a speech problem. He had a criminal record. He had 4 decades of self-doubt calcified into his identity, and none of it mattered. Because when heaven decides to move through a person, the person's limitations become the very stage on which power performs. Napoleon Hill said that our only limitations are those we set up in our own minds. Moses set up his limitations for 40 years, and it took him one encounter with the presence to begin tearing them down. What bush are you standing in front of right now, pretending you did not see the fire? Here is what most people misunderstand about acting like heaven sent you. They think it means becoming loud, becoming arrogant, puffing themselves up, and announcing their greatness to anyone who will listen. But that is not the sovereign presence. That is insecurity wearing a costume. The person who truly knows that God is within them does not need to prove it. A king does not announce that he is a king. He simply governs. A river does not argue that it is powerful. It simply moves the stone. When you truly understand who you are, a quietness settles over you that no amount of loudness can imitate. You stop competing because you are not comparing. You stop begging because you are not lacking. You start acting from fullness instead of acting from hunger. And this changes everything about the results you produce, because the world responds to your state, not to your strategy. Think about how you enter a room when you feel worthy versus how you enter a room when you feel like an intruder. Same body, same face, same clothes, completely different presence, and people feel that presence before you say a single word. Napoleon Hill said that you are the master of your fate and the captain of your soul. And he understood that mastery begins internally long before it appears externally. The captain does not panic in the storm, not because the storm is small, but because the captain knows the ship. You are the ship and the captain both. Heaven equipped you with everything you need for the voyage you were sent to make. But you have to stop treating yourself like a passenger on your own life. Let me show you what this looked like in the life of a young shepherd who understood the sovereign presence better than the trained soldiers around him. His name was David, and he was the youngest of 8 sons, the one his own father did not even think to call in when the prophet came looking for a king. He was left in the field with the sheep, forgotten, overlooked, the afterthought of his own family. And yet when the giant Goliath stood in the valley and terrified an entire army of grown warriors, it was this forgotten boy who walked forward. Every trained soldier saw the same giant and thought, "He is too big to defeat." David saw the same giant and thought, "He is too big to miss." Same giant. 2 entirely different inner worlds. The soldiers measured the giant against themselves and shrank. David measured the giant against the presence within him and grew. When David spoke, he did not say, "I will try." He said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from this Philistine." Do you hear the certainty in that? He was not hoping. He was declaring. He was living from the end before the stone ever left the sling. This is what it means to act like heaven sent you. You do not wait for the victory to feel victorious. You carry the victory inside you, and then you walk into the battle already knowing how the story ends. Napoleon Hill said that faith is the head chemist of the mind, and that when faith is blended with thought, the subconscious mind picks up the vibration and translates it into its spiritual equivalent. David had blended his thought with faith so completely that his subconscious mind knew the giant was already fallen before the fight began. His body simply carried out what his spirit had already decided. If you have a giant standing in front of you right now, a fear, a debt, a diagnosis, a closed door, I want you to write one word in the comments. Write "standing." Because you are still standing, and the giant is not as permanent as it looks. Right now, wherever you are, I want you to do something with me. If you can close your eyes, close them. If you are driving or moving, simply soften your gaze and stay with me. Take a slow breath in through your nose and let it fill you all the way to the bottom of your lungs. Hold it for a moment at the top and release it slowly, letting your shoulders drop as the air leaves you. Do that once more. Breathe in the awareness that the presence of God is not somewhere above you but somewhere within you. Hold that thought at the top of the breath and release everything that told you otherwise. Now, in the quiet of your own mind, I want you to say these words not as a wish but as a fact. I am heaven sent. I carry the presence within me. I do not beg for what is already mine. Say it again, slower, and let each word land somewhere real. I am heaven sent. I carry the presence within me. I do not beg for what is already mine. Feel how the body responds to that. Feel how something in your chest lifts, how your spine straightens without you trying, how the fear loosens its grip just slightly. That is the sovereign presence rising in you. That is what David felt in the valley. That is what Moses felt at the bush. And it was always available to you. You just had not given yourself permission to feel it. Napoleon Hill spent his life studying the most successful people of his era, and he concluded that every one of them had learned to control the inner world before commanding the outer one. The practice you just did is not decoration. It is the foundation. The person who masters that inner declaration masters far more than they realize. There is a reason the enemy of your growth works so hard to make you feel ordinary. Because an ordinary person is easy to control. An ordinary person accepts limits. An ordinary person stays in line, keeps quiet, does not disrupt anything. But a person who wakes up to the presence within them becomes unmanageable in the most beautiful way. They stop being available for the small life that was assigned to them. And this is why you have to guard the way you see yourself with everything you have. Proverbs tells us that as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Not as a man thinks in his head, in his heart. The heart is the deep place, the place beneath your reasoning, the place where your true beliefs about yourself live. You can say beautiful affirmations with your mouth all day long, but if the heart still believes you are an orphan, the heart will win. This is the work, bringing the heart into agreement with heaven. And it does not happen through force. It happens through repetition, through emotion, through the patient reprogramming of the inner image until the old identity finally dissolves. Napoleon Hill called this autosuggestion the principle of influencing your own subconscious mind through repeated, emotionally charged conviction. He said the subconscious mind will act upon any thought impulse it receives, and it does not evaluate whether that thought is true or false, helpful or harmful. It simply accepts and executes, which means the story you tell yourself about yourself is not a small thing. It is the blueprint your entire life is being built from. So what story have you been telling? What have you been silently repeating in the heart in the dark when no one else could hear? Because that repetition has been building the house you now live in. Consider Joseph, a young man who had every reason to believe the universe was against him. His brothers hated him so much, they threw him into a pit and sold him into slavery. He was carried into a foreign land, stripped of his family, his freedom, his future. And just when he began to rise in that foreign house, he was falsely accused and thrown into prison for a crime he did not commit. Years passed in that prison, years. If anyone had the right to feel abandoned by heaven, it was Joseph. And yet, something in him refused to forget who he was. Something in him held the presence even in the pit, even in the prison, even in the years when nothing made sense. And when the moment finally came, when Pharaoh needed someone to interpret a dream that no one else could understand, Joseph was ready. Not bitter, not broken. Ready. He walked out of that prison and into the second highest position in all of Egypt. And later he said something to the brothers who had betrayed him that reveals the entire secret of his inner life. He said, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." Do you understand what that is? That is a man who never once let the circumstance write his identity. The circumstance said slave. Joseph said sent. The circumstance said prisoner. Joseph said positioned. He acted like heaven sent him even when heaven seemed completely silent. And that unshakable inner posture is precisely what carried him through 13 years of darkness into the light of his purpose. Napoleon Hill said that every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equivalent or greater benefit. Joseph lived that truth before Hill ever wrote it. The pit was not the end of his story. The pit was the strange beginning of his throne. If you are in a pit right now, if you are in a season that feels like punishment, write the word sent in the comments. because you might be closer to the palace than the pit is letting you believe. I want to pause here, not to interrupt the flow, but because something is happening right now that matters. If you have made it this far, it is not an accident. Something in you is hungry for this. Something in you already suspected that you were made for more than the small apologetic life you have been living. And if these words are stirring that hunger, if they are watering a seed that has been dry for too long, then do something that seals it. Tap the like button. Not because I need it, but because that small act is you agreeing with the truth being spoken over you. And if you have not yet subscribed, subscribe now, because everything I create here exists to remind you of exactly who you are when the world tries to make you forget. There are people scrolling past this message right now who desperately need to hear it, and your simple engagement is what carries it to them. You are not just watching a video. You are part of a movement of people remembering their origin. Now let us go deeper, because there is a dimension of this that we have not touched yet, and it changes how you walk through every single day. Acting like heaven sent you is not just about how you see yourself. It is about how you treat the ordinary hours of your ordinary life. Because heaven does not only show up in the dramatic moments, in the giants and the thrones and the burning bushes. Heaven shows up in how you speak to the person at the counter. Heaven shows up in the patience you carry when you are exhausted. Heaven shows up in the integrity you keep when no one is watching. The presence within you is not waiting for a stage. It wants to move through you today, in the small and unremarkable moments that make up the actual substance of a life. There is a woman in the ancient scriptures whose story is often told as a fairy tale, but it is actually one of the most powerful lessons in acting from the presence you carry. Her name was Esther, and she was an orphan, raised by her cousin, a member of a people living in exile in a foreign empire. By every measure, she was nobody, and through a series of events she could never have orchestrated, she found herself the queen of that empire, positioned in the exact place where a genocide against her people was about to be signed into law. Her cousin sent her a message that has echoed across 3,000 years. He said, "Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? For such a time as this." Do you feel the weight of those words? Esther could have hidden. She could have stayed silent and protected her own comfort. Approaching the king uninvited could have cost her life, but she made a decision that only a person who understands the sovereign presence could make. She said, "I will go to the king, and if I perish, I perish." That is not recklessness. That is a woman who understood that she had been positioned by heaven, that her being in that palace was not luck but assignment, and that she would rather act from her calling than survive in her fear. She acted like heaven sent her because heaven had, and she saved an entire nation. Napoleon Hill said that a definite purpose, held with persistence, becomes an all-consuming obsession that draws to itself the forces necessary for its fulfillment. Esther had a purpose so definite it overrode her fear of death. What would you do today if you truly believed you had been positioned on purpose for such a time as this? Because you have been. Your life is not a random collection of circumstances. It is an assignment with your name on it. But let us be honest about something, because I do not want to give you inspiration that shatters the moment life gets hard. There will be days when you do not feel heaven sent. There will be mornings when you wake up and the presence feels 1,000 miles away. When the bills are louder than the promises. When the silence of God feels less like peace and more like abandonment. And in those moments, the temptation is to conclude that everything you believed was a lie. This is where most people lose the treasure. They mistake a feeling for a fact. They think that because they cannot feel the presence must have left. But the sun does not stop existing because a cloud passed in front of it. The presence within you does not depend on your ability to feel it on a given Tuesday. It is your identity, not your mood. Elijah understood this the hard way. Here was a prophet who had just called down fire from heaven, who had just experienced one of the most spectacular displays of divine power in all of Scripture. And within a single day, he was so depressed, so exhausted, so afraid that he sat under a tree and asked God to let him die. The same man, the same presence, radically different feeling. And do you know what God did not do? God did not lecture him. God did not shame him for his despair. God let him sleep. God fed him. God gently restored his body before ever addressing his soul. And then, in the famous moment, God did not appear in the wind or the earthquake or the fire. God appeared in a still, small voice, a whisper, because sometimes the presence is not loud. Sometimes the presence is the quietest thing in the room, waiting for you to get still enough to hear it. If you have ever sat under your own tree, exhausted and ready to give up, write the word whisper in the comments, because the whisper is still speaking to you even now. Let us do something together again, because knowledge that is never felt never transforms anyone. I want you to imagine, as vividly as you can, that you are waking up tomorrow morning as a person who fully knows they are heaven sent. See yourself opening your eyes. Before your feet even touch the floor, there is no anxiety, no dread, no rehearsal of everything that could go wrong. Instead, there is a quiet certainty rising in your chest. See yourself standing, and notice how you stand. Your shoulders are back, your head is level. You move through your home like someone who belongs in their own life. See yourself walking out your door and into the day, and notice that you are not bracing for rejection. You are carrying something. You are carrying a presence, and everyone you meet feels it before you speak. See the way people respond to you differently, because you are responding to yourself differently. See the opportunities that seem to find you, the right words that arrive at the right moments, the doors that open not because you forced them, but because you finally stopped knocking like a beggar and started walking like an heir. Hold that image. Feel it in your body, because the subconscious mind cannot tell the difference between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. This is what Napoleon Hill taught about the creative imagination. He said the imagination is the workshop wherein all plans created by man are fashioned, and that whatever you can vividly picture and emotionally believe, you begin to move toward with a force that operates beneath your conscious awareness. You are not daydreaming right now. You are programming. You are planting an image of your true identity so deep that your daily choices will begin to grow up around it like a garden around a seed. Keep that image close as we continue, because the next thing I'm going to tell you determines whether that vision becomes a memory of a nice feeling or the actual shape of your future. The difference between the person who is transformed by this truth and the person who merely enjoys hearing it comes down to a single word: consistency. Anyone can feel inspired for an afternoon. Anyone can have a moment of clarity under the right music, with the right voice speaking the right words. But the presence within you does not respond to occasional bursts of belief. It responds to a consistent inner posture, held day after day, in the mundane and the difficult and the boring. This is why so many people have powerful spiritual experiences that change nothing. They mistake the feeling for the fruit, but the feeling is only the seed, and a seed that is planted and then dug up every few days to check if it is growing will never become a tree. You have to let the new identity take root in the dark, in the unglamorous repetition of choosing it again and again when no one is applauding. There is a man in the scriptures whose entire life turned on this principle of quiet consistency, and his name was Abraham. God made him a promise that seemed impossible, that he would become the father of many nations, and then made him wait 25 years for a single son. 25 years of holding a promise with no visible evidence. And the scripture says that Abraham did not waver through unbelief, but was strengthened in his faith, being fully persuaded that God had power to do what he had promised. Fully persuaded, not occasionally hopeful, fully persuaded across decades in the silence when everyone around him surely thought he was a fool. That is the consistency the presence requires. Napoleon Hill said that persistence is to the character of man what carbon is to steel. It is the ingredient that turns a soft intention into an unbreakable resolve. Abraham was persuaded so consistently that his conviction outlasted his own aging body, and in the end, the impossible became his reality. Now I need to speak to the part of you that resists all of this, because there is a part of you that hears these words and immediately whispers back, "But you do not know what I have done. You do not know my past, my failures, the things I am ashamed of, the ways I have fallen short." And that voice believes it is protecting you with its honesty, but it is actually imprisoning you with a lie. The lie is that your worthiness to act like heaven sent you depends on your performance. It does not. It never did. Look at the people God chose all through the scriptures. A murderer became the deliverer. A shepherd boy became a king. And even after that king committed adultery and arranged a man's death, he was still called a man after God's own heart, because he knew how to return. A fisherman who denied even knowing Jesus 3 times became the rock the entire church was built upon. Not a single one of them was chosen because they were flawless. They were chosen, and they became willing, and the presence did the rest. Peter is the one who comforts me the most. Here was a man so impulsive, so quick to speak and slow to think, that he once tried to walk on water, and then sank the moment he doubted. He is the one who swore he would never abandon Jesus, and then abandoned him before the rooster crowed. If anyone had a record that disqualified them, it was Peter. And yet the risen Christ did not come to Peter with condemnation. He came to Peter on a beach, cooked him breakfast, and asked him 3 times, "Do you love me?" 3 questions to heal 3 denials. And then he handed him the keys to everything. This is the God who is within you. Not a God waiting to catch you failing, but a presence longing to restore you every time you return. Your past is not a wall. It is the very material heaven uses to build something no one saw coming. If you have ever felt disqualified by your own history, write the word restored in the comments, and let that word begin to overwrite the old one. Let me show you something about how the presence actually changes your outer circumstances, because I do not want you to think this is only about feeling good on the inside while your life stays the same. When you begin to genuinely act like heaven sent you, your behavior shifts in ways that reshape your entire reality. Consider how differently you make decisions. The orphan mind decides from scarcity. It grabs, it hoards, it settles, it takes the first thing offered because it is terrified nothing better will come. But the heir mind decides from abundance. It can wait. It can say no to a good thing because it trusts a better thing is coming. It negotiates from a place of calm rather than desperation, and that calm is magnetic. People trust it. Opportunities gravitate toward it. Consider how differently you treat other people. The orphan mind sees everyone as competition, as a threat, as someone who might take the limited resources it is fighting for. But the heir mind can be generous, can celebrate others, can lift people up, because it does not believe that someone else's rise diminishes its own. And generosity, real generosity that flows from security, is one of the most powerful forces for building the kind of relationships and reputation that open doors money cannot buy. Consider how differently you respond to failure. The orphan mind sees failure as final proof of unworthiness, but the heir mind sees failure as information, as tuition, as a temporary detour on a journey whose destination is already secured. Napoleon Hill studied 500 of the wealthiest and most accomplished people of his time, and he found that nearly every one of them had failed, often spectacularly, before they succeeded. What separated them was not the absence of failure, but the interpretation of it. They refused to let a defeat define their identity. They acted like people who were sent to win, and so a temporary loss could never convince them they were losers. Do you see how the inner posture becomes the outer life? The presence within you is not a decoration. It is the root system of everything you will build. There is a scene that captures the entire tension between the orphan and the heir in a single, unforgettable image. It was night, and the disciples were in a boat on a stormy sea, and they saw a figure walking toward them across the water, and they were terrified. But Peter, being Peter, called out, "If it is you, tell me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said one word, "Come." And Peter did something no ordinary man has ever done. He stepped out of the boat and walked on the water. For a few glorious moments, an ordinary fisherman defied everything that should have been impossible, because his eyes were fixed on the presence in front of him. But then the scripture tells us he saw the wind. He noticed the waves. He shifted his attention from the presence to the problem, and the moment he did, he began to sink. And here is the lesson that could change your entire life. Peter did not sink because the storm was too strong. Peter sank because he looked at the storm instead of the one who had called him. The water had not changed. The wind had not changed. The only thing that changed was where he placed his gaze. And is that not exactly what happens to you? You begin to rise. You begin to walk in the impossible. And then you look at the bills, the diagnosis, the rejection, the size of the giant, and you begin to sink, not because heaven withdrew its power, but because you withdrew your gaze. But watch what Jesus did. He did not let Peter drown to teach him a lesson. Immediately he reached out his hand and caught him. Even in Peter's sinking, the presence was close enough to catch him. That is the God who is within you, close enough to catch you the instant you begin to sink. Napoleon Hill said that the starting point of all achievement is a burning desire held steadily before the mind, and that the moment we allow fear to displace that focus, we surrender the very power that was carrying us. Keep your eyes on the presence, and you will walk on water. Fix them on the storm, and you will sink into it. The choice in every moment is yours. If you have ever felt yourself sinking after a season of walking in faith, write the word "caught" in the comments, because the same hand that caught Peter is reaching for you right now. There is another moment in the Gospels that I return to again and again, because it holds the entire mystery of what we are talking about. Jesus is asleep in a boat when a violent storm rises up, and his disciples, experienced fishermen who had spent their lives on that water, are convinced they are going to drown. They wake him in a panic, shouting that they are perishing. And Jesus stands up in that chaos, and he speaks 3 words to the wind and the waves: "Peace, be still." And the scripture says there was a great calm. But here is the part most people miss. He did not only rebuke the storm, he turned to his own disciples and asked, "Where is your faith?" Because the storm was never the real problem, the storm inside them was. He had been carrying the peace the entire time. He slept through the storm because the storm outside had no authority over the presence within him. And what he was showing them, what he is showing you right now, is that when the presence lives in you consciously, you carry a calm that the outer chaos cannot break. You become the one who can speak peace into the storm instead of being swallowed by it. This is what it means that God is within you. It is not a poetic sentiment. It is an operational reality. The same presence that stilled the sea is seated in the center of your being, and it does not panic when your circumstances rage. It waits for you to remember it is there. Napoleon Hill said that the mind is the one thing over which we have complete and unquestionable control, and that within this control lies the power to master our circumstances rather than be mastered by them. When you master the storm within, the storm without loses its grip on your destiny. I want to give you something you can carry into tonight, because the hours just before sleep are the most sacred hours for reshaping who you are. In those final minutes before you drift off, the conscious, critical, doubting part of your mind grows quiet, and the subconscious opens like soft soil, ready to receive whatever seed you plant. Most people plant worry there. They lie down and replay every fear, every regret, every anxious projection of tomorrow, and then they wonder why they wake up heavy. But you are going to do something different. Tonight, when you lie down, place one hand gently over your chest and take 3 slow breaths, feeling your own heartbeat under your palm. And as you breathe, I want you to speak these words silently into the dark. Tonight I release the orphan and I remember the heir. The presence of God is within me and it never leaves. I sleep in peace because I am held by something greater than my fear. Say it slowly. Let each phrase settle, and then let one final image fill your mind as you fall asleep. See yourself tomorrow, walking through your day carried by that presence, unshaken, unhurried, unafraid. Do not force anything after that. Simply drift into sleep holding that image, and let the subconscious mind do the quiet work of building it into your identity while you rest. Napoleon Hill said that the subconscious mind works continuously, day and night, and that it will act upon the dominant thoughts you feed it, whether you feed it deliberately or by accident. So feed it deliberately. Give it the image of the person you were sent here to be, and let it labor on your behalf through the night. Do this for 1 week and you will feel the shift. Do it for 1 month, and the people around you will notice it. The nightly ritual is small, but small things repeated in faith become the largest forces in a human life. There is a man in the scriptures who was hiding in a winepress, threshing wheat in secret, terrified of the enemies that surrounded his people. His name was Gideon, and he was, by his own description, the least in his family from the weakest clan. And an angel appeared to him and said something that must have sounded absurd. The angel said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." mighty warrior, to a man hiding in a hole, to a man who did not feel mighty in any way. And this is the pattern of heaven that you must understand. Heaven does not call you what you feel like. Heaven calls you what you are. The angel did not address Gideon's fear. The angel addressed Gideon's identity, an identity Gideon himself could not yet see. And Gideon argued, of course. He said, "If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us?" He pointed at his circumstances as evidence against his calling. But heaven does not measure your calling by your circumstances. Heaven measures your circumstances by your calling. And that same Gideon, that frightened man in the winepress, went on to lead 300 men to defeat an army of thousands because he finally began to act from the identity heaven had spoken over him instead of the identity his fear had assigned him. This is the choice in front of you every single morning. You can act from what you feel, or you can act from what you are. You can let the winepress define you, or you can rise up as the mighty warrior heaven has already declared you to be. Napoleon Hill said that you can be anything you want to be if you believe with sufficient conviction and act in accordance with your faith. For whatever the mind can conceive and believe, the mind can achieve. Gideon conceived it, believed it, and acted upon it, and the least in his family became a deliverer of nations. Let me address something practical, because I know some of you are thinking, this sounds beautiful, but how do I actually live this when my life is full of pressure, deadlines, difficult people, and real responsibilities? The answer is that acting like heaven sent you is not an escape from your responsibilities. It is a transformation of the energy you bring to them. When you go to work tomorrow, you are not going as a person trying to survive the day and collect a paycheck. You are going as a carrier of the presence, someone whose calm steadies the room, whose integrity raises the standard, whose excellence flows not from anxiety about being fired, but from the joy of doing everything as an expression of who you are. When you deal with the difficult person in your life, you're not meeting them as a wounded soul defending itself. You are meeting them from a place of fullness, able to set boundaries without bitterness, able to love without losing yourself, because your sense of worth is no longer up for negotiation in every interaction. When you face the financial pressure, you do not collapse into scarcity and panic. You make wise, deliberate decisions from a centered place, and you plant seeds of faith and action, knowing that the presence within you is a resourceful presence, a creative presence, a presence that has led people out of far worse than you are facing. This is the applied practice. Napoleon Hill built his entire philosophy on the marriage of faith and definite action. He said that faith without works is dead, echoing the scripture itself, and that the person who dreams must also do, that the vision in the mind must be married to disciplined effort in the world. So you hold the inner posture of the air, and then you act. You apply for the position, you start the business, you have the difficult conversation, you take the step. And you do it all from the calm certainty that you were sent here on purpose, equipped for exactly this, carried by a presence that will not abandon you halfway. I want to talk about the people who will resist your transformation, because this is a part almost no one prepares you for. When you begin to rise, when you begin to act like heaven sent you, not everyone will celebrate. Some of the people closest to you built their relationship with you around the small version of yourself. They knew how to relate to the you that doubted, the you that stayed small, the you that never outshone them. And when you begin to change, when you begin to carry yourself with a new authority, it will disturb them. They may accuse you of thinking you are better than everyone. They may try to remind you of your old failures. They may, subtly or openly, try to pull you back down to the version of yourself that made them comfortable. And you must be ready for this, because if you are not, their reaction will feel like evidence that you were wrong to rise. It is not. It is evidence that you are rising. Even Jesus, in his own hometown, was rejected by the people who had watched him grow up. They said, "Is this not the carpenter's son?" They could not receive from him because they could not see past the small identity they had assigned him years before. And the scripture says he could do no mighty work there because of their unbelief. Let that be a warning and a liberation. You cannot let other people's inability to see your new identity become the ceiling on your growth. Sometimes acting like heaven sent you means walking forward even when the people who knew your winepress cannot yet see your calling. Guard the new identity fiercely. Surround yourself as much as you can with those who call you mighty warrior rather than those who keep reminding you of the hole you were hiding in. If someone in your life has ever tried to keep you small, write the word rising in the comments and declare it over your own future. And now we arrive at the question I planted at the very beginning, the one I asked you to hold. I asked you if God is truly within you, if heaven really did send you. Then why are you still living like an orphan, begging at the gate of a house you already own? I told you everything I would share would exist to answer it, and here is the answer, now that you are ready to receive it. You have been living like an orphan for one simple reason. No one ever told you the inheritance was already yours. You were waiting for a moment of arrival that was never coming, because you were already home. You were standing at the gate of your own house, rattling the bars, pleading to be let in when the whole time the gate was never locked and the house had your name on the deed. The sovereign presence was not something you needed to earn or achieve or wait for. It was placed in you at your creation, when you were formed in the image of the one who made the stars. The reason you lived like an orphan is that you accepted an identity that was never true. And the moment you truly see this, the begging stops. Not because you suddenly became worthy, but because you finally realized you always were. The prodigal son in the famous parable spent everything and hit the bottom and rehearsed a speech to convince his father to take him back as a servant. But the father ran to him, embraced him, and put a ring on his hand before the son could even finish his rehearsed unworthiness. The father never saw a servant. The father only ever saw a son. And that is how heaven has always seen you. Not as a servant begging at the gate, as a child who simply forgot the way home. The house was always yours. The presence was always within you. You were heaven sent from the very first breath, and every day you spent believing otherwise was a day the inheritance sat waiting, untouched, for you to simply walk in and claim it. So from this moment forward, something has to change in the way you walk through the world. You have carried the orphan long enough. You have begged at your own gate long enough. You have shrunk in rooms you were sent to fill, apologized for a light you were sent to shine, and asked permission from people just as lost as you once were. That season is over, not because your circumstances have all changed, but because your identity has been restored. You are not who your fear said you were. You are not who your failures said you were. You are not who the people in your winepress said you were. You are heaven sent and God is within you, and that truth was settled before you were ever born, and it will not be undone by a hard week or a heavy year. Act like it. When you rise tomorrow, act like heaven sent you. When you walk into that room, act like the presence goes with you. When the giant stands in the valley, act like the victory is already inside you. When the storm rises, act like the calm is yours to speak. When they try to remind you of the pit, act like the palace is your destination. Because acting like heaven sent you is not pretending. It is remembering. It is finally living from the truth that was always true. You do not chase the presence. You carry it. You do not beg for the inheritance. You claim it. You do not hope you are worthy. You know you were made worthy at the moment of your creation, in the image of the God who does not make mistakes. This is who you are. This is who you have always been. And from this day forward, you get to live like it. But before we close, I want to give you the deepest layer of this truth, the one that separates a passing feeling from a permanent transformation. Because there is a difference between believing that heaven sent you and living from the awareness that heaven is with you every moment. The first is a belief you hold. The second is a relationship you inhabit. And the presence within you was never meant to be a doctrine you agree with. It was meant to be a companion you commune with, moment by moment, breath by breath, decision by decision. Think of Enoch, of whom the scripture says only a handful of words, that he walked with God and he was not, for God took him. He walked with God, not visited God on certain days, not remembered God in emergencies, walked with him daily as a way of life, so continuously that the boundary between his life and the presence dissolved entirely. This is the invitation hidden inside acting like heaven sent you. It is not a technique to get more out of life. It is a doorway into a way of living where you are never actually alone, where every room you enter accompanied, where every burden you carry is carried by two. The reason so many people feel exhausted by life is that they are trying to carry the weight of an heir with the strength of an orphan. But the moment you remember the presence walks with you, the weight redistributes. The load becomes shared. You stop white-knuckling your existence, and you begin to move through it with a strange and holy ease, not because life got easier, but because you stopped facing it alone. Napoleon Hill discovered, through decades of studying the greatest achievers, that nearly all of them drew upon a source of guidance and strength beyond their own conscious reasoning, what he called infinite intelligence, a wisdom available to any mind, humble enough and faithful enough to draw upon it. What he described in the language of philosophy, the scriptures described in the language of relationship. The presence is not just within you, the presence walks with you. And a person who knows they never walk alone walks differently than everyone around them. And so we come to one final practice, a way to seal everything we have walked through together so that it does not evaporate the moment you move on with your day. I want you to take one more slow breath with me, and as you breathe in, I want you to receive this truth as though it were being spoken over you by heaven itself. You are not an accident. You are not a burden. You are not too late, too broken, too ordinary, or too far gone. You were sent. You were sent with a purpose that only you can carry into a time that was chosen for you, with a presence living inside you that has never once left. Breathe that in, and as you breathe out, release every lie that ever told you otherwise. Release the shame. Release the smallness. Release the years of begging at a gate that was always open. Now say these final words, silently or aloud, as a covenant with your own future. From this day forward, I act like heaven sent me, because heaven did. I act as if God is within me, because God is. I will not shrink. I will not beg. I will not forget who I am again. Let those words become the foundation you build the rest of your life upon. And know that whenever you forget, and you will forget, because we all do, you can return to this truth in an instant, because it does not depend on your feelings. It depends on your origin, and your origin does not change. You were made in the image of the divine, and nothing that has happened to you and nothing you have done has erased that image. It has only been covered over, and today you uncovered it again. Before you go back into your life carrying this presence with you, there is something I want you to do, and it matters more than you might think. If this message reached a place in you that has been asleep for too long, if it reminded you of who you have always been beneath the fear and the failure and the forgetting, then take a moment to seal it with an act of agreement. In the comments below, write these words and mean them. I am heaven sent, and God is within me. Write it as a declaration, not just a phrase, because when you speak your identity out loud, you are commanding your own subconscious mind to line up with the truth, and you are sending a signal into the world that you are done living like an orphan. Tap the like button, because that small act helps this message find the next person who is sitting in their own winepress, waiting to be called a mighty warrior. And if this channel has become a place that reminds you of your true identity, subscribe and stay, because everything I create here exists to keep watering the seed we planted today, to keep reminding you of the presence within you on the days you forget it most. And then before you close this, think of one person in your life who has been living small, begging at their own gate, forgetting who they are. Share this with them. You might be the messenger heaven uses to remind them of their own inheritance, because you were never only sent for yourself. You were sent to carry light into a world full of people who forgot they were made of the same light. So go now and walk differently, speak differently, rise differently, act like heaven sent you because it did. Act as if God is within you, because He is. And may that presence go with you in every room, through every storm, all the days of your life. You were sent. Now go and live like it.